We'll be talking about Media Catalog. It is a project we're working on for our applied project course, which is CISE 399, under the guidance of Professor Abrar Qureshi. Um, this is a web application based off of Spring MVC framework. There are places where we've used a little bit of Spring Boot, REST API. We've used JPA Hibernate. We're using Apache Tomcat as the servlet container or Tomcat server. Um, we are using JSP for the views, and we're using small modules which will go through if they come up during the code demo. We'll just in this video we'll just go through all the code infrastructure which we've created for this specific project. Now, firstly, there are everything is modularized between the packages. io.eval is for configurations, and then controllers, exceptions, entities, repositories, and service, and so on. Then we'll just go through them real quick. So firstly, there's appconfig.java, which basically is a configuration file. It does a component scan, and it enables the web MVC infrastructure for our application. Then we have a view resolver, which basically locates the JSP files which we have and displays them. The next part in the configuration is multi-part resolver. This is basically for uploading our files. It helps us also uploading, setting a maximum size for our uploads, and the setting a maximum in memory size while uploading so that our application does not crash. Next, we have the app initializer, just because in Spring we do not have a main. What we have is abstract annotation config dispatcher servlet initializer, which basically initializes our application. Next is the persistence config file. In this class, what we do is we set up the configuration basically for persistence or perhaps the JPA Hibernate, whatever you feel comfortable with. It basically enables our transaction management, and it uses a property source, which is our application.properties file, which makes it easier to make changes to the database that we're linking it to. So basically you can change the location of your database that you're connecting it to. You can change your username, password here, and you can set the show SQL and format SQL to false if you don't want to see the queries that are being run on the database. Right now they're set to true just for debug purposes, and we have a create drop setup so that whenever we run the application from new, it basically drops the whole tables and then creates the schema all over again. So application.properties basically helps us make changes on the go and does not have to, like, you don't have to access the code for every time you need to make a change to the database. Then we have all these basic configuration in here. Next is the controller, which basically works with our views. It has a bunch of functions. Sometimes basically whatever the user clicks on, we are using the REST API to interact with the view. So while getting any details, or if we want to push the data to the view, we're using post. If we want to get some data from the view, we're using request method.get. These are basically a RESTful API that we're using in this controller. But for any functions that need to be done behind the scenes, those are all done in the service files. We will go through them in a bit. This is for sign up function, and then login and log out. Basically make sure of the HTTP session as well. So if you see that in logout we are using the session and invalidating it, and in login we are basically getting a new session. Um, and then we have a media controller, which basically is the controller for media. You'll notice that we're using a REST controller, which basically specifies that it is a controller and that it's using a REST API as well. The other part is we have the upload directory set as temp uploads. So this is where the uploads are being made. And then we have the upload functions and etc. other functions that are running in the controller itself. Some of the functions need to be handled by the controller itself because we need an interaction between the view and the controller. Otherwise, we prefer to keep the backend functions in the service section of the code. And we'll go to these are the exceptions. We won't spend much time in that. It's just basically it extends the exception class of Java, and then it just sends users already exist exception, or we have a user not found exception defined as well. Now we'll go to the model or the entity entities, which is one is user.java, the other one is media.java. So basically what we do is we mark as an entity, or we are using add data annotation. This is basically a Lombok library that we're using, which basically implements the getters and setters for the elements of the class, like ID, first name, last name, email, password. So it will basically implement the getters and setters on the go. So even if you add another string here or another element in the user class, it will automatically create the getters and setters for that. Then we have we are explicitly saying that we need a table by the name of user. Then we have named queries, which we are explicitly defining by the name user.findByEmail so that we can access this query whenever we want. We are explicitly saying that we want an email that is unique, and so that we don't have two of the same emails in for two users. We are using UUID so that the IDs are unique as well. At ID annotation is basically to make sure that the IDs are unique, and the UUID basically gives us a string, a complicated string, but unique string for each entry in the table. We are basically asking our database here to provide us the UUIDs instead of Spring generating those UUIDs. We have both functionalities. We chose to have the JPA Hibernate handle that for us. Now, on a similar note, we are creating an entity for the media as well. We're putting a title, description, file path, where the file is being saved, and the file name, and we are connecting it through to the user account by the user ID in the user account section of the media. Now, we'll just skip to service before we go to the repository. We have interfaces for iMedia and iService. So we are implementing a bunch of functions here. So most of them, what we'll do is we'll go and ask the repository to run the functions for us, because we are making changes or we're getting the data from the repository. Repositories are basically what will be running any communication to the data. We want to keep that separate from the actual functions that we are doing, basically like throwing exceptions or finding uh, making any changes at all, setting hash passwords or checking the hash password. Uh, so just any functions that we're doing should be separate from any functions that need communication with the database. So these are the services, um, and then we have the repository, and we have interfaces where we just list the functions that we are using in the repositories, and then the repositories are basically using the entity manager to basically create queries and call the functions, call the get the data or make changes to the data, or like by persisting the user by after making a change, or merging it when updating any data for the user, or removing the user itself. So all those changes are done by the repository itself. And next we'll see a couple of views that we have. So basically what it does is it uses JSTL in order to access some of the files, and then we have add include tags to include the CSS files. Um, Plus, it's a basic JSP file which helps us run the code. Um, the next is okay, we can see the login form as well. So basically, what it does, it is sets an input email and input password, which basically goes to our um, signup.htm endpoint, and it will basically save those for us. The next thing is the pom.xml, which is basically our dependencies that we're using to run different sections, or by using different modules in the application itself. Thanks a lot for listening to this. I hope you understood the code explanation. Thank you.